So, Lone Rider here, and I want to talk about something that happened a while ago in Canada, because I think, even though I'm a cyclist here in America, I think in the United States of America, I think the incident is relevant now more than ever before. Now let me preface this by saying that as a cyclist you're usually worried about one of two groups of people on the road in terms of having a collision. The clueless people who, that's mostly what you're worried about. People who are careless, reckless, just don't understand traffic, aren't paying attention, whatever. And in particular might just be ignorant of cycling or the fact that cyclists are even going to be there. There is a smaller subset, however. These are the people that are actually malicious, that will actually kill you on purpose rather than through negligence. To be fair, they're a small group. They always are, whatever category you're looking at, because the vast majority of people aren't murderers at heart, right? They're not. They might not be great people, but they're not evil people. So this group is always very small, but they do exist. Now, what happened in the Canadian case? There was a cyclist who was riding. He was stopped at an intersection, a traffic signal. A car that was behind him hit him from behind. The driver then tried to flee the scene. The cyclist either trying to get out of the car's way so he wouldn't get run over a second time, or trying to keep the guy from fleeing the scene, which is understandable because that's illegal. Ended up holding onto the car. The car then drove off and did in fact flee the scene with the guy hanging on it. The car then crashed into various roadside objects to knock him off, and then backed over his body once he was knocked off. Now it turned out that the rider of the bicycle was just a regular Joe. The driver of the car was a former Canadian Attorney General. The last person you would think would do a murder, but named Bryant Michaels, I believe. And at the time, initially, they said, "Oh, that we have all this evidence, security footage, and witnesses, and stuff to show that this happened, and we can proceed with the case against him." Very shortly, however, he was released without even attempting to seek bail in court, and he was then dropped all the charges against him. And instead of talking about the question of what he did or didn't do and what evidence there was, all of a sudden, what he did or didn't do and what evidence there was became irrelevant, and the focus of all the discussion and the media articles seemed to be about the cyclist, that the cyclist wasn't a nice guy, that he drunk too much in the past, questions of whether or not he had anything to drink that night, when apparently he did. But all of these things are irrelevant to the incident. If the cyclist, for example, had been drinking and there was a question of whether or not he caused the crash by swerving in front of the car, that's one thing. But he wasn't riding, although the newspapers described this as the driver having a confrontation with a cyclist who was riding erratically. The cyclist wasn't actually riding at all at the time the collision occurred where the driver hit him. He was stopped, stationary at a traffic intersection. So how can you say he was riding erratically? He was stationary when he was hit. I mean, this... now obviously people shouldn't ride if they've had too many beers or whatever, but the point is that you can get a DUI on a bike the same as a car for the same reason. But causally, that's not related to the collision. The collision was the driver hit a stopped cyclist because he was an impatient so-and-so. I mean, like whatever the cyclist may have done, what does that have to do with the particulars of that incident? Nothing. But see, the driver, in addition to hiring a lawyer, hired a PR firm. And it was clear his tactic was just demonize the dead guy. And it worked. And it worked so well that he got off. And he's never had to pay a cent or serve a day in jail for his deliberately taking this guy's life to try and avoid the consequences of causing a traffic collision by fleeing the scene. Now, here's an interesting thing. A lot of people were saying, trying to defend this guy, that it was self-defense. That the cyclist was belligerent, perhaps understandably so, after getting hit by the car, and the guy felt threatened, so that's why he tried to drive away, and that's why he tried to knock him off the car. Here's the thing. I'm not sure these people, and I'm not a lawyer, I don't play one on TV, but I know a little bit about the subject. You cannot claim self-defense. There's a generally accepted legal principle that you can't claim self-defense if you're the one who starts the fight. Right? You can't initiate physical force and then turn around, and when it's not going your way and you get a little concerned, just straight up kill the other guy and then claim it was self-defense. Why? Because you're the one who began the incident. You're the one who initiated force. So it's not defense in that sense. And this is generally accepted. Now, What people are ignoring, I think, is that the incident didn't start with the cyclist grabbing on the guy's car. The incident started with the car that the guy was driving being used to hit the cyclist, and then with the guy in the car trying to flee the scene. And you could say, well, it's understandable. He didn't want to get in trouble. Who would? But not wanting to get in trouble is not an appropriate excuse for taking somebody's life, especially if what you're afraid of getting in trouble for is something that you'd only get in trouble for because you broke the law, right? Otherwise, every criminal who was committing a crime and fleeing from the authorities, or every burglar who broke into a home and was confronted by the homeowner, could kill the other person and claim it was self-defense because they didn't want to get in trouble, right? That's not how it works. If somebody breaks in your house, they can't kill you and claim self-defense. If somebody attacks you in the street and then you get the upper hand, they can't straight up kill you and then claim it was self-defense. And if somebody hits you with a car, no less than with a fist, which is a lot smaller and less harmful, they can't then turn around and hit you again and kill you and then claim that it was self-defense. Why? Because you initiated physical force in the incident. And what people are either overlooking is the fact that the incident didn't start with the cyclist attacking some random innocent motorist. The issue started with some random motorist hitting an innocent cyclist and then trying to criminally flee the scene, illegally flee the scene. And I got to put this down to the fact, well, he did hire a PR firm, right? He was politically connected. He probably knew people. Probably called in some favors. We won't know because nobody's ever going to come clean about that sort of thing. But part of what I wonder is getting back to what I said before about the two categories. There's a fairly large number of people who are careless on the roads. There's a very small number of people who are actually malicious. This Bryant driver, Bryant Michaels, was obviously one of the malicious ones. He did, after all, kill a person. But then why did he get off, right? Why did he get off so easy? And why, after he got off, are people still defending him? And to this day. And I honestly think that has a lot to do with the overlap between these groups. There may only be a handful of malicious people who are actually willing to act with violence on their maliciousness against cyclists. But there's overlap between them and the rest of the public with people who, there's only a handful of people who will actually go and kill somebody. Thank goodness, right? Because the ones we have are bad enough. But there's only a handful of them. But there's a fairly larger group of people who, while they might not actually hurt someone or kill them, they're going to be okay with somebody else doing so. They're going to say, well, that cyclist got what he deserved, or what was he doing there in the first place, or whatever. And yes, this is obviously illogical. It would be like if somebody's sitting on their porch and they're shot in the drive-by shooting, to turn around and then blame the guy who got shot and say, well, what was he doing sitting on his own front porch? Right? You have every right to be on your own front porch. You have every right to be on the street. In fact, unlike the driver, you have a legal right to operate your vehicle on the road. It's been, at least in the United States, it's a legally established fact going back to court cases like Swift versus City of Topeka in the 1890s, and all the intervening, 110, 120 years of traffic law and roadway practice and customs, etc. Yes, obviously this is illogical. They're saying, well, what was he doing there? Well, he had every right to be there. The bigger question is, what was the guy with the car doing hitting somebody, which is something you don't have a right to do. Right? The fact that there are a lot of these people who have this animosity or empathy towards cyclists, I think, is why he got off, because his defenders, his lawyers, his PR firm were able to tap into that. There's a lot of people out there who wouldn't have wanted to kill the cyclist, but who don't particularly want the guy who killed him to get in trouble because they don't like cyclists. They just don't think it's worth somebody going to jail for taking the life of a cyclist. Which is why I said this is never more relevant than it has been. Because this attitude still persists, and it persists not only obviously in Canada, but also here in the U.S., just a little bit south of their border. And it's something that if you ride, you see every day, right? And obviously we need to better educate people about roadway safety and traffic interaction. People need to be aware that cyclists are there, that their actions behind the wheel have consequences, etc., etc. That will address, ineptitude, carelessness, etc. So will enforcing traffic rules against people who are careless or reckless. And obviously the people who do actual, deliberate attacks with their cars, the person who actually hits you out of malice, that person can be criminally charged if, the evidence warrants. However, when you have a high-profile case where the evidence does apparently warrant and they get off anyway, again, I have to wonder if it's because the guy he killed was a cyclist. This dude had a lot of advantages going for him in terms of who he was and who he knew and the influence he had in the first place. But the fact that the cyclist was just some Joe, right? Just like you or me or somebody else. Leave aside the things they stirred up about his background, that he might have drunken or done drugs or had a fight or this. I don't drink too much. I've never done drugs and I don't get in fights. And I sure as hell don't ride after drinking or drive. Nobody I know who's a cyclist does that, okay? Why? We're well aware of the risks of the roads. So if that was the case, and if he was, he had something to, again, that's not like you or me, maybe. But the point is, that had nothing to do with the crash and with his death and with the other guy getting off. Again, anything he may have done that was bad or that was, on his own part, wasn't an issue in the crash. You could say, well, was he safe to ride or not? We don't know. He was safe enough that he stopped at a traffic signal and he remained stopped until it turned green. And he was hit when he was stopped. So you can't say, well, it's like he was drunk and swerving all over the place. No, he was stopped where he should have been stopped for a reason he should have been stopped when he was hit from behind by a careless driver. And in that sense, this literally could be you, me, or anyone else. Which makes me wonder, when you have people talking about, oh, well, the cyclist got what he deserved, read some of the internet posts in response to some of the articles or even some of the video clips. And you'll be surprised. I remember one where I read just this morning, which is actually what prompted me to do this, where somebody put something up there to the effect of, the cyclist deserved to die. Why? Because he was stopped at a red light or whatever? Isn't that what you're supposed to do? And if you can imagine this being transferred to any other group of people, race or ethnicity or nationality, this would be bigotry of the first order. But cyclists, it seems, are the last minority on the roads in America. We're the only group of people that you can either brag about killing or boast about how you'd like them to be killed or they all deserve to die. Nobody bats an eye. I mean, there might be some people who say, well, hey, don't say it out loud, right? That's how we all really feel, but don't say it out loud. But there's not going to be any consequence for that. Nobody's going to say, hey, that's a very bigoted thing to say. Well, what's wrong with you? Why are you wishing death on an entire group of people? What is wrong with you? We don't say that, do we, as a society? Cyclists say that, and a handful of other people who maybe know cyclists and are aware that this is even going on, this is even a cultural component to the roads, might say it as well. If you're a cyclist, your parents or your spouse or your brother or your friends might also be exposed to this. The vast majority of people don't even know what's going on, and when they do hear occasional snippets of it, it's always out of context with the cyclist posed as the villain of the situation. And so they're like, well, yeah, maybe that guy was a little brusque in how he said it, but I certainly understand the sentiment. Or again, maybe they're just saying, hey, don't say it out loud. But the point is, this attitude is there. And we don't talk about it, I think, very much. We should. And it's because it's there and because we don't talk about it that people can tap into it to justify killing somebody because they just happen to be out there on the road at the same time as you, and you were entitled and impatient and so on and so forth. Right? What happened? Guy came up to the traffic light, was waiting off to the side, and suddenly in front of the car. That's what you do, right? A lot of times you don't want to wait directly alongside the car or even behind it, because what will happen is, as cars are coming up, if let's say you're going straight and they're going to make a turn, boom, they're going to turn right across your path. So you don't want to be like here, you don't want to be here, you want to either be directly behind it in the center of the lane or in front of it. And usually there's no reason to be directly behind it if you can safely get by on the side. This is a generally accepted traffic principle. Anybody who bikes can tell you this. The so-called, right hook, when somebody turns like this as you're going straight, worst place to be is either here or right here. Either slightly in front of the car, maybe off to one side or another, but in front of the car or behind it. And if you're behind it, you want to be in lane with it, so the car behind it doesn't pass you and then do the same thing. But the point is, he was waiting, stopped at a traffic signal, and the car ran into him. Everything else comes from that. So the driver can't say, well, it was self-defense, I was frightened. You're not allowed to claim self-defense in an incident that you start, that you instigate, where you initiate physical force, where you initiate confrontation. You can't just hit somebody and then turn around and kill them when you think it's not going to go your way and then be like, well, it was self-defense. Again, there's a generally accepted legal principle you can't do that. For some reason, it didn't work in this case. Maybe it was because a lot of the arguments that it was self-defense were being made outside the courtroom, in the court of public opinion, by press statements or by people posting online or whatever. So they're not going to be people. The argument would be just as open to the logical criticism of you can't claim self-defense in a situation you start, but they're not going to be legally barred from, let's say, presenting it. Where somebody, if you bring that up in a court case. You started fighting and you just straight up killed the other guy, and then, I felt like the fight wasn't going my way. That's not self-defense. And if you brought that up in an actual courtroom, I'm pretty sure they would mention that to you. That's not self-defense. But in the court of public opinion, you can argue for things that would never fly in court to justify a defense that would have to be made in court if those things weren't accepted at face value in the court of public opinion and the charges dropped. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think all of this, the fact that it was somebody politically connected, the fact that people misunderstand what self-defense means, all these things, I think, have some role in what occurred in this guy getting off. But I think at the end of the day, the big thing is this undercurrent of animosity towards cyclists, that overlap between the regular guys who might just be careless drivers but don't actually want to kill anyone, and the small core group of malicious people who straight up don't care if they murder you. Because like I said, if one of those people, like Michael Bryant, hits you and then kills you, it's not just the small core group of malicious people that are going to stand up for him and try to rationalize the fact that he just straight up killed somebody. It's going to be people in the wider public. And that's because of this cultural animosity towards cyclists, which we do not talk about. And maybe we need to talk about it. Maybe we need to put this front and center and try to address this. And how much does that affect other safety issues, besides for just straight up deliberately killing somebody or hitting somebody with your car? When a cyclist is hit by a driver who then goes, well, I just didn't see him. How much of it was that you really didn't see him, so it was just a case of you being careless and not looking where you were going? Or how much of it was you didn't even expect cyclists to be there because you don't accept that they belong on the road, so you're not looking for the cyclist, not because you're careless, but because your worldview is such that you've chosen to not consider that. You've chosen to not take care of that. You've chosen not to exercise part of your responsibility as a road user, which is to be not only aware of your surroundings, but conceptually to understand what they consist of and what the traffic dynamic consists of. And that's something where this undercurrent of animosity towards cyclists could really explain a lot, right? And if it were addressed, might really help a lot, might really prevent harm, save lives, prevent injuries, prevent collisions, and certainly make people feel a lot more comfortable riding. And that, I think, is what will ultimately help the situation. You get more people on bikes, more cyclists are then on the road at a given period of time, more drivers will, even if they're just relying, even if conceptually they don't get it, perceptually they will be seeing you there, and it will be drummed into them that you're there, and they'll be more likely to look for you and less likely to hit you out of carelessness or negligence or whatever. And that will solve the wider problem. But more people aren't going to get on bikes when they hear stories like, hey, some dude got caught on video with witnesses straight up murdering a bicyclist to get out of the responsibility for carelessly hitting him with his car, or negligently, maliciously hitting him with his car, and fleeing the scene. And he just got off. So, if a guy can get off with straight up murdering somebody for, when there's supposedly, evidence and security video and witnesses and all that, Well, chances are when I get hit, there's not going to be evidence and security video and witnesses, so I stand absolutely nil chance of having any justice done on my behalf. And it's frightening when you hear that people can kill somebody like you and walk away counting their change. And the driver even wrote a book, 28 seconds or something, describing the incident, where he basically told the whole thing from his point of view, where presumably he was the innocent victim of like a vicious bicycle gang or something. I don't know. I never read the book. I have no desire to read the book because the guy it's coming from is a dude who did the murder. Anything he writes in there is not going to be, I mean, what's he going to do? You know, talk about how he felt so threatened by this guy that he had just laid out on the pavement by knocking him over with his car. And so it was self-defense. Well, but again, it can't be self-defense if you're the one who hits the other guy and starts the incident. I don't know, but the fact that he was able to write a book, he was going on news shows and doing interviews, this is appalling. Right? And you can say, well, yeah, the guy was politically connected. Yeah, but the person he killed was also a cyclist. And in the minds of the public, I think a lot of times, the non-riding public, that translates to the person he killed was just a cyclist. And that's an attitude that's not confined to Canada. It occurs here in the U.S. as well, maybe more so in here in the U.S. And it's something that we need to deal with, right? And let's be clear, this isn't about the fact that some people may have a bad experience with one or two rude cyclists. Because for any healthy, well-adjusted, sane person, the fact that somebody may or may not be perceived as rude does not excuse their murder. So, you know, the fact that somebody out there who might say, well, I ran into a rude biker the other day, or I ran into a biker who was asinine. You know what? Maybe you did. What does that have to do with somebody straight up killing a biker who wasn't asinine, who was minding his own business, stopped at a traffic signal? Right? I don't know. But like I said, this is more relevant than ever today. You know, as a cyclist here in the U.S., might seem strange for me to be commenting on something that happened to a Canadian cyclist. But I think we can see parallels. We can see parallels and we can see things that need to be done here. I certainly do, and I think other cyclists do as well. You know, and in some way getting a wider appeal for roadway safety issues and cycling-related issues, pointing out that it's not just cyclists who are affected. It affects other people who use the roads too, for example, when drivers are, you know, not paying attention, or when they're on their cell phone, or when they're swerving, can't hold the lane position. All of this is true. But there are some things that are particular issues for cyclists, and those aren't getting addressed. Those aren't getting addressed, and I think they have to be. Certainly it would be nice if they would be addressed before we had another incident like this, where somebody straight up kills somebody and then gets off. And again, at the end of the day, why do you get off? I honestly think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the guy he killed was just a cyclist. And if you ride and that doesn't piss you off, it should. Lone Rider out.